Yes, so I'm from HSAD. It's an advertising company. Some people might know of this, but it used to be called LG Ad. I've been in this business for more than 20 years, and I've been only focusing on the creative works. And as a result, my title changed to Chief Creative Officer. I've never tried to convert this into Korean, but the Seoul Digital Forum did translate this into Korean, and he said I was the Chief Executive Officer of Creative. I liked this name because creative refers to a small area in the advertising field. But rather than just looking at the product, creative was used in a broader sense, in other words, to refer to the ecosystem. So that's why I like this name. It's no longer a product of the advertising company. It's more of an ecosystem. And it's applied in many different fields, such as creative management or creative economy. But if you think about it a while, creative in regular businesses and in the advertising business is different. The reason why an electronics company needs creativity is because they need to design a new smartphone. If Korean Air needs creativity, it's to relieve the inconvenience that even the consumers were unaware of. So creative is a means in other businesses. But what about advertising companies? One line of copyright or one well-made sketch is worth several $1 million because it determines who wins in the competition. So in our business, creative is not a means, it is an end. An advertising company, thus, is more of a company involved in creating ideas, not creating advertising. So I've been in the area of creative for more than 20 years. I want to ask, what is creative? What organization enables creative, and what sort of space and leader facilitates the creative? There's something that people misunderstand a lot. I have a great idea. Why didn't you come up with a good idea? Those are the things that we often hear. But there's some room for misunderstanding here because it makes it sound like idea is contained in pockets in the brain and all you need to do is take it out. But let's look at the brain and how it looks like. This is the brain that we used to think and put out ideas. Here we've got neurons, which are the units of the brain. And they say that there are about 100 to 1,000 billions of neurons in the brain. You might not realize how large this number is, but let's say someone was born in AD1, and he was born with $10 billion. Let's say he gives out $1 for every second. After 2013 years, this person still hasn't used more than 1/3 of his wealth. So 10 billion is an enormously large number. Our brain contains 10 billion neurons. And then these neurons all have connecting cells or tissues between them. And these are called synapses. One human brain has the capacity equivalent to 100 computers, and the internet itself is a very complex network. Let's look at how the brain works. You see, it is ignited chemically and electrically. And this is how thoughts are generated. This is only a brain of a fish. But what about human beings? That image that you saw belonged to a small fish that's almost just as big as your finger. But people took pictures of how the brain works. When an idea emerges, it doesn't come out of a pocket. the moment where an idea is generated shows that there's some electric sparks that take place in the synapses or the connective tissues. A new path is created connecting the neurons, and that is when the idea is generated. So there is nothing new under the sun. Creative is only about connecting, converging, merging, and fusing, and networking. But why do we think that a new idea is totally new? There are two rules for ideas. One is the rule of tipping point, and the second is the rule of hotspot. Let's look at the tipping point. This is what tipping point is about. You can heat water, but it will stay a liquid until 99 degrees. But once it hits 100 degrees, it evaporates and turns into vapor. So this is the tipping point when something totally is disrupted. Why does an idea appear to be a discontinuation or a disruption? Schumpeter also talked about creative destruction. Einstein also said that logic will get you from A to Z, but imagination will get you everywhere. So you can be here at one moment, but be at a totally different location the next. So this is what tipping point is about. Let me explain in an easier way. There's a game called iChem. This consists of 4 elements: water, fire, earth, and wind. These elements are combined in a different way. If you combine water and dirt, you get swamp. If you combine wind with fire, you get energy. So this is repeated. What do you get when you combine man with wannabe? You can get a hint by looking at the mushroom. You get Mario. But what's the connection between Mario and the 4 elements? Tipping point is what leads to such qualitative transformation. What about hotspot? Hotspot is the space for an idea that dominates a certain condition. It might sound complicated, but the most important thing about the hotspot rule is that the degree of creativity is proportional to the relevance between the subjects being connected. So you've got relevance, and the subjects that are to be connected has to have a high relevance. But these two things that are being connected have to be very far apart. In other words, it has to be relevant, but it has to be so far apart but that nobody saw that relevance until that moment. So in the end, creative is a chemical combination of things that appear to be impossible. You can't find this on the internet because I made this up. I was talking with a university professor 6 years earlier to write a book. He suddenly asked me, "Hey, you've been in the creative business for 20 years. What exactly is creative?" When he asked that, I sort of panicked and thought about this for about 4 seconds. And suddenly my mouth answered that creative is about chemically combining things that are impossible. He wrote this in his book and sent the book to me later. I read this and was quite astonished. I was wondering why I even said that. But I thought about this later, and it seemed to make a lot of sense because hotspot is about connecting two things that are so far apart that it seems impossible. And it's not about physically integrating things. It's about triggering a chemical change or transformation. This is an example of a chemical fusion. Do you know who this person is? He's the person who changed the art world of the 20th century. This is Picasso. And he was such a wonderful drawer when he was young. But he wanted something new, not just about being a good drawer. He went to the Trocato Museum in Paris and he found these African masks. When he combined his ability to draw with these masks, he came up with the masterpiece of the 20th century, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And that gave birth to Cubism. In the 1950s, everybody was thinking about what exactly DNA was. Crick and Watson was the first to discover this double helix. These two weren't considered to be such great scientists, but when everybody was thinking about this in a biological way, these two approached it from a different aspect because one of them was a chemist, one of them was a biologist, but the other was a physical structuralist. As a result, they came up with this. This is Damien Hirst's masterpiece, For the Love of God. It's the same thing. Do you know that the first MP3 was created by a Korean in 1997, the person who worked for Sean Jongbo? At the time, there was the appearance of Napster, which was a P2P site, but these two disappeared. One thing resulted, however, that was iPod. iPod has nothing original. It just combined the two business models. This person said that Apple and himself was only at the crossroad of technology and liberal arts, and they combined that. Let's look at the trend of internet traffic. From the 1990s to the early 2000s, data volume did not increase that much, but during the past 12 years, it grew exponentially. In the Renaissance, we had geniuses or generalists who were good at everything. But these days, we have an excessive amount of knowledge, and nobody has the time to be a generalist. They say that the product life cycle for a cell phone is 3 months. Can you ask for 3 years so that you can come up with a good idea when product life cycles are so short these days? What about sustainability? There was a time when the buzzword was that one genius will be able to support 100,000 other people. But what if we don't have that one genius? We can't afford to depend on one person, one genius. That's why we need networks. Fusion does not take place only in the brain cell. It also takes place between people. There is a scholar, a psychologist called Kevin Dunbar. He conducted a research to look at where ideas came from. He set up several labs and installed CCTV cameras like a big brother. He observed the actions and behavior of the scientists in the lab. We would usually think that an idea comes from under the microscope or when you pour two chemicals together and a sudden pop takes place. But according to Kevin Dunbar, new discoveries and inventions were created when people would talk during their break or when people would share stories of success and failure. During this conversation, one person's idea is fused with another person's idea, and that is when good ideas are created. This is BMW's building called a Project House, and it was a very successful building. Not because it's beautiful, but because of its inner structure. All of the labs surrounding the edges are separate labs focusing on certain parts of the automobile. The central space serves as a hub. It integrates all the ideas coming from the different labs. This convergence allowed BMW to become very innovative. This is the Academy of Athene by Raffaello. And this painting shows all the different ideas that we're talking about. In the middle, you've got Plato and Aristoteles, who represent a cluster. So you've got hotspot. Then you have those who are thinking on their own and creating ideas on their own. These are all different schools. You've got a cluster with strong connections, and the most interesting thing is that there's a weak link, somebody pointing outwards. This person is looking at the outside, and it's a weak connection. And because all of these different types of connections existed together, Athene was able to create the seeds of Western civilization. This is us. We bring a member from different teams and created a project team called XT. It's not, our ideas are not as great as those from the Athena school, but sometimes we do come up with great ideas. And every time that happens, everybody asks, whose idea was that? But this is not the right question. Anybody who asks this question does not understand what idea is. Whenever we have an idea meeting, there are those who throw open questions and plant the seeds for an idea. And then there's people who bring these ideas together. We have a saying that unless you thread the beads, it's useless. All right, you need the beads because those are valuable, but unless you string them together, it's really valueless. From what I see, the novice works alone, but the veteran is able to generate a bigger idea by lending his ideas and borrowing from others. So in the end, I have to be somebody's hotspot, and somebody has to be my hotspot. The space where this takes place, I call Brain Republic, Idea Democracy, Creative Collectivism, and Social Ideation. Cooperation is about accumulating relevant knowledge, but I believe collaboration is the fusion of heterogeneous knowledge based on intuition and insight. If we can create something totally different by combining two different elements, that would be what we call a collaboration. So knowledge is not found in the library anymore. It has to go out to the public square, and go out to the crossroad. It's okay to have your own insight and your own point of view, and copyright that. But in the future, that only serves one person's interest. That side of knowledge, that kind of knowledge has to go out in the public and be fused with others. There's one person who compressed this idea in a very short phrase. It's called 화이부동, and this word was by our ancestor. Of course, this didn't refer to creativity, but what this means is that a totally different two elements or people can come together. When these heterogeneous elements or people come together, they can be harmonized and create something totally new. In the end, it becomes larger than the total of the sum. These four characters contains all the message that I wanted to communicate to you today. Thank you.